Jake Morrison gripped the metal bar above his head as the dropship shook violently. The engines screamed as they cut through the alien atmosphere. He could see the red and orange planet below through the small window. This was it. After 3 years of war, everything came down to this mission. The other soldiers in his team checked their weapons one last time. 12 of the best Navy SEALs in the human fleet.
Ow.
They had trained for months for this operation. Their job was simple, but deadly dangerous. Get to the alien command center. Destroy the planetary defense system. Make it possible for the human fleet to land and win this war. Jake looked at each of his men. He had served with most of them for years. They trusted him completely. He trusted them the same way. But something felt wrong about this mission. The intelligence reports were too clean, too perfect. In his experience, nothing in war ever went according to plan. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. 2 minutes to drop zone. Enemy fire is heavy down there. You might not be able to stay in formation. Jake nodded. He had expected this. The Zephyrian aliens were smart. They knew humans were coming. Their bioweapons, the creatures they called Vrakith, would be waiting. These beasts were 12 feet tall and had claws that could cut through the strongest human armor. Worse, they were intelligent. They hunted in packs like wolves but thought like soldiers. The dropship lurched suddenly. Red warning lights flashed throughout the cabin. Jake heard the pilot cursing over the radio. They were taking fire from ground-based weapons. The formation was breaking apart. 30 seconds, the pilot yelled. Can't hold her steady much. Longer. Jake activated his helmet communicator. Listen up. If we get separated, remember the mission. The command center is 40 miles north of the landing zone. We stick to the plan no matter what happens. His second in command, Lieutenant Rick Hayes, nodded. What if we can't regroup, sir? Jake met his eyes. Then we complete the mission alone, whatever it takes.
Hey.
The dropship's rear door opened with a hiss. Wind and the smell of alien air rushed into the cabin. Below them, Jake could see a jungle of strange crystal trees that glowed with their own light. Between the trees, dark shapes moved. The Vrakoth were already hunting. Go, 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 Jake shouted. One by one, his team jumped into the alien night. Jake watched each man deploy his parachute safely. Then anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky around them. Bright beams of energy cut through the darkness. We're taking heavy damage. Jake was the last to jump. As he fell through the alien air, he watched his dropship explode above him. The pilot had stayed at his post to make sure the team got out safely. Now he was gone. Jake's parachute opened automatically. He steered toward the landing zone, but the wind was strong. Enemy fire filled the sky. He could see his team members scattered across miles of jungle. Their careful formation was ruined. He hit the ground hard in a clearing surrounded by crystal. Trees. The trees hummed with a low sound that made his bones vibrate. He quickly gathered his chute and checked his weapons. Everything was working. His armor showed no damage. But when he tried to contact his team, he got only static. Jake was alone on an alien world filled with creatures designed to kill humans. 40 miles away, the enemy command center waited. He had no backup, no support, and no way to call for help. Most soldiers would have found a hiding place and waited for rescue, but Jake Morrison was not most soldiers. He checked his compass and started walking north. The jungle around him was unlike anything on Earth. The crystal trees grew in perfect spirals toward the sky. Their light made everything look like a dream. Strange flowers bloomed on vines that moved without wind. In the distance, he could hear the calls of alien creatures. Jake had studied everything humans knew about this planet. The Varakath were not just mindless beasts. They had their own society, their own rules. They respected strength and despised weaknesses. Most humans who encountered them either ran or died fighting. Jake planned to do neither. After an hour of walking, he found tracks in the soft ground. Vrakoth tracks. 3 sets, moving in the same direction he was going. The creatures were hunting something or someone. Jake followed the tracks carefully. His training had taught him to move silently through any terrain. Even in this alien jungle, he made no sound. The Varakuth were ahead of him, but they did not know he was there. He found them in a clearing where one of his team members had landed. Lieutenant Hayes was trapped in a crystal tree, his parachute tangled in the branches. 3 Verkath circled. Below, trying to figure out how to reach him, Jake studied the situation. The creatures were focused on Hayes. They had not noticed Jake yet. He could attack them from behind and probably kill all 3. But that would bring other packs running. The gunfire would alert every Verakath for miles. Instead, Jake made a decision that went against every military manual ever written. He stepped into the clearing and walked toward the Verakath. His weapon was ready, but not raised. He moved slowly and deliberately, making no threatening gestures. The 3 creatures spun around to face him. They were even more impressive up close. Their scales shimmered like metal. Their eyes were intelligent and calculating. Jake could see them deciding whether he was a threat. The largest Verakath, clearly the pack leader, took a step toward Jake. It opened its mouth and showed teeth like daggers. A low growl came from its throat. Jake stopped walking but did not retreat. He kept his eyes locked on the creature's gaze. In his research, he had learned that Verakath respected direct eye contact. It was a sign of strength, not challenge. The standoff lasted several minutes. Jake could hear Hayes breathing hard in the tree above. The 2 smaller Verakath moved to flank Jake, but their leader held them back with a gesture. Finally, Jake spoke. His voice was calm and steady. "I am not here to fight you. I am here to complete my mission." The Verakath leader tilted its head. Jake knew it could not understand his words, but it could understand his tone. No fear, no aggression. It's just a statement of fact. Jake took one more step forward. The Verakath leader could have killed him easily. Instead, it did something that would be talked about for decades. It stepped aside. Jake nodded once, a gesture of respect between warriors. Then he fired a single shot that cut through Hayes' parachute lines. The lieutenant dropped to the ground, rolled, and came up running. The 2 humans left the clearing together, moving north toward their objective. Behind them, the 3 Verakath watched them go. Then, for reasons their alien minds did not fully understand, they began to follow, at a distance, not hunting. Just following. Jake Morrison had been on the planet for less than 4 hours. He was already becoming a legend among creatures that had never met a human who showed them respect instead of fear. The war was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. As he and Hayes moved through the crystal jungle, Jake felt the weight of his mission, 40 miles to the command center. Unknown dangers between here and there. But for the first time since landing, he felt confident. He had made contact with the enemy, and both sides had walked away. That was a beginning. The night was long, and the real challenges were still ahead. But Jake Morrison had taken the first step on a journey that would transform him from a lone soldier into something much more. A leader who could bridge the gap between species through courage, respect, and an unshakable belief that understanding was more powerful than any weapon. Jake and Hayes moved through the crystal jungle for 2 hours without speaking. Alien trees cast strange shadows in their glowing light. Every few minutes they heard sounds in the distance, Verakath calls echoing through the forest. The creatures were communicating with each other, sharing information about the humans in their territory. Hayes kept looking over his shoulder. "Sir, I think we're being followed." Jake nodded. He had known it from the beginning. The 3 Verakath from the clearing were tracking them, staying just out of sight, but they were not hunting. Their behavior was different. Curious, not aggressive. "They're learning about us," Jake said quietly. "Just like we're learning about them." They came to a stream that flowed between 2 rows of crystal trees. The water was clear, but had a blue glow that came from tiny organisms floating in it.
Ow.
Jake knelt down and tested it with his field scanner. The water was safe to drink. As they filled their water bottles, Hayes spoke in a low voice. "What happened?" "Back there, sir. I've never seen Verkath act like that. Should have attacked immediately." Jake finished filling his bottle and stood up. "They're intelligent, Rick. More intelligent than our reports suggested. They have their own culture, their own rules. We've been treating them like wild animals, but they're not." A howl echoed through the forest nearby. Then another, from a different direction. The calls were getting closer. "We need to move," Hayes said, reaching for his weapon. "No," Jake said firmly. "We wait." Hayes looked at him like he was crazy. "Sir, with respect, there's a whole pack coming our way. We should find cover or prepare to fight. Trust me on this, Rick. If we run or hide, we become prey. If we stand and fight, we become enemies. But if we stand our ground and show no fear, we become something else." Through the crystal trees, dark shapes moved toward them. Jake counted at least 6 for a Koth, maybe more. They were surrounding the stream, cutting off all escape routes. Hayes raised his rifle, but Jake put a hand on his arm. "Lower your weapon. Do not aim at them unless I give the order." "Sir, this is insane." "That's an order, Lieutenant." Hayes reluctantly lowered his rifle but kept it ready. His hands were shaking slightly. Jake understood. Every instinct told a human to fight or flee when faced with these creatures. Going against those instincts took tremendous willpower. The first Rakath emerged from the trees. It was massive, even larger than the pack leader from before. Scars covered its scales, proof of many battles. This was an old warrior, experienced and dangerous. Behind it came 5 others, all moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. The scarred leader approached slowly. Its eyes never left Jake's face. When it was 10 feet away, it stopped and made a sound deep in its throat. Not a growl or a roar, but something more complex, almost like speech. Jake took a step forward. Hayes made a small sound of alarm, but Jake ignored him. He was operating on pure instinct now, trusting his research and his understanding of warrior cultures. The Vrakath leader tilted its head, studying Jake intently. Then it did something remarkable. It began to circle Jake, keeping the same distance, never turning its back on him, but clearly examining this strange human who showed no fear. Jake remained perfectly still during the inspection. He kept his breathing slow and steady. His hands stayed at his sides, weapons within reach but not threatening. When the creature completed its circle and faced him again, Jake slowly raised his right hand and placed it over his heart. Then he gave a slight bow of his head. The gesture was universal among warrior cultures. Recognition of strength, respect. Between fighters, the Vrakath leader studied the gesture for a long moment. Then, to Hayes' amazement, it copied the movement. Its clawed hand touched its chest, and it lowered its massive head slightly. The other Vrakath made sounds among themselves. Not aggressive sounds, but what seemed like discussion. They were debating what to do about these humans who acted unlike any others they had encountered. Jake reached slowly into his pack and pulled out a field ration. He tore open the package and ate a small piece, then offered the rest to the Vrakath leader. It was a risk. The creature might see the offer as weakness or insult. The leader approached cautiously and sniffed the food. Its intelligent eyes studied Jake's face. Then it took the ration carefully in its claws and tasted it. The creature's expression was impossible to read, but it did not spit out the human food. "My God," Hayes whispered, "you're feeding them." "Showing respect," Jake corrected.
Oh.
"In many cultures, sharing food is a sign of peaceful intentions." The Vrakath leader made another complex sound and gestured to its pack. They began to withdraw, but not in retreat. They moved with dignity like soldiers completing a successful mission. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the leader looked back at Jake one more time. Then it made a sound that could only be described as a farewell. When they were gone, Hayes lowered his rifle completely. His hands were still shaking. "Sir, what just happened?" "That was impossible," Jake shouldered his pack and checked his compass. "We made first contact, Rick. Real first contact. Not human soldiers meeting alien weapons, but intelligent beings recognizing each other." They continued north, following the stream. Jake's helmet camera had recorded everything. When the military analysts saw this footage, it would change everything. Humans thought they knew about the VRAK. As they walked, Hayes kept looking around nervously. "Are they still following us?" "Yes," Jake said. "But they're not hunting us anymore. Word is spreading through their network. They're trying to understand what we are. What we are. We're humans. We're the enemy. Jake stopped walking and turned. To face his lieutenant, are we? Think about it, Rick. Why are we fighting this war? The Zephyrians attacked our colonies. They used the Vrakoth as living weapons. But what if the Vrakoth don't want to be weapons? What if they're slaves, not allies? The idea was revolutionary. For 3 years, humans had seen the Vrakoth as extensions of Zephyrian military power. But Jake's encounter suggested something different. These creatures had their own intelligence, their own culture, their own capacity for choice. They walked in silence for another hour. The jungle around them was changing. Crystal trees were taller here, their light brighter. Strange fruits hung from vines, glowing like lanterns. In the distance, they could see mountains rising toward the alien sky. Sir Hayes said suddenly, "Movement ahead." Jake raised his hand for silence and listened. He could hear it too. Something large moving through the forest, but trying to be quiet. Not the confident approach of the pack they had just met. This was different. Stealthy, they took cover behind a fallen crystal tree. Jake used his scope to scan the area ahead. What he saw made him grip his weapon tighter. A lone Vrakoth was limping through the trees. It was smaller than the others, probably younger. Dark fluid stained its scales. It was badly wounded and trying to reach the stream. It's hurt, Hayes observed, probably separated from its pack. Jake studied the creature's injuries through his scope. Energy weapon burns, the kind made by Zephyrian weapons. It's been shot. By its own allies? What do we do? Jake made another decision that would have horrified his commanding officers. He stood up and walked toward the wounded Vrakoth, his medical kit in his hands. The creature saw him coming and tried to run, but its injuries were too severe. It collapsed near the stream, breathing heavily. When Jake approached, it bared its teeth in warning. But the gesture was weak. Jake knelt down beside the alien warrior and opened his medical kit. The creature watched him with eyes full of pain and confusion. Jake began to clean its wounds with antiseptic, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "Easy there. I'm trying to help you. I know you can't understand my words, but maybe you can understand my intentions." The Vrakoth gradually stopped struggling. As Jake treated its wounds, other sounds came from the forest. The creature's pack had found them. But instead of attacking, they watched from the trees as a human soldier saved the life of one of their own. When Jake finished bandaging the wounds, the young Vrakoth looked at him with something like wonder. It made a soft sound, almost like gratitude. Then its pack emerged from hiding and carefully helped it to its feet as they prepared to leave. The pack leader approached Jake. It was not the same one from before, but its behavior was similar. It touched its chest and bowed its head. Then it made a complex series of sounds that seemed directed at Jake personally. Hayes watched in amazement as the entire pack repeated the gesture. "Sir, I think they're thanking you." More than that, Jake realized. They're accepting me, not as an enemy or even as a neutral party, as someone worthy of respect. After the Vrakoth disappeared into the forest, Jake and Hayes continued their journey north, but everything had changed. Jake Morrison was no longer just another human soldier in enemy territory. He was becoming something unprecedented in the 3-year war. A bridge between species, a leader who commanded respect through strength, wisdom, and compassion. The command center was still 30 miles away, but Jake knew that when they reached it, he would not be fighting alone. Word of the human who healed instead of killed was spreading through the Vrakoth network. The war was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. Commander Thesice stood before the massive screen in his command center, watching the reports flow in from across the planet. His long, thin fingers tapped against the metal desk as he read each message. Every report said the same impossible thing. A single human was moving through Vrakoth territory, and the creatures were not attacking him. "This cannot be accurate," Thexai said to his communications officer. "Run a complete system check. These reports must be corrupted." The young Zephyrian officer bowed his head. "Sir, I have checked the system 3 times. All sensors are working correctly. The reports are accurate. HFY turned back to the screen. For 3 years, the Vreketh had been perfect weapons. They attacked any human on sight. They showed no mercy, no hesitation. Now suddenly, they were letting a human walk freely through their hunting grounds. It made no sense. "Show me the visual recordings," he ordered. The screen changed to show helmet camera footage from Jake's first encounter with the Vrakoth pack. The Xi watched in disbelief as the human stepped into the clearing without fear. He saw the pack leader step aside instead of attacking. He watched the human bow his head in a gesture of respect. "Impossible," the Xi whispered. "The human is using some kind of mind control device." "Sir," the communications officer said carefully, "our scans show no unusual technology. The human carries standard military equipment only." The Xi's anger grew. "Then how do you explain this behavior? The Vraketh are engineered to kill humans. It is their primary function." The officer had no answer. On the screen, more reports appeared. The human had treated a wounded Vraketh. He had shared food with a pack leader. He was moving steadily toward the command center, and his reputation was spreading through the entire Vraketh network. Meanwhile, 30 miles south of the command center, Jake and Hayes had found shelter in a cave formed by twisted crystal roots. The alien formations created a natural hiding place where they could rest without being seen. Ow. But Jake knew they were not truly hidden. Vraketh knew exactly where they were. "Sir," Hayes said, checking his equipment, "I'm still getting no contact with the rest of the team. We have to assume we're on our own." Jake nodded while studying his tactical map. The command center is heavily defended. Energy barriers automated. Weapons, and at least 200 Zephyrian soldiers. Even with our full team, it would have been nearly impossible to infiltrate. "So what's the plan now?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. Through the cave opening, he could see shapes moving in the forest. Vrakoth scouts keeping watch. Not guarding them like prisoners, but protecting them like allies. The plan is changing. "Rick, we're not going to infiltrate the command center. We're going to walk through the front door." Hayes stared at him. "Sir, that's suicide. Even if the Vraketh don't attack us, the Zephyrian weapons will cut us down before we get within a mile of the facility. Or not if we're not alone." Before Hayes could ask what he meant, sounds came from outside the cave. Not the usual Vrakoth calls, but something different, organized, rhythmic. Jake grabbed his rifle and moved to the cave entrance. What he saw made him lower his weapon immediately. A large group of Vraketh had gathered in the clearing outside their cave, but they were not arranged for hunting or fighting. They stood in formation, like soldiers at attention. At their head was the scarred pack leader from their second encounter, the one whose wounded pack member Jake had helped. The leader approached the cave and made the chest-touching gesture of respect. Then it began to make a series of complex sounds. The sounds had structure, rhythm, meaning. It was trying to communicate something important. Jake stepped out of the cave slowly. The leader continued its sounds and began to gesture toward the north, toward the command center. Other Vraketh joined in, all making similar sounds and gestures. "My God," Hayes whispered from behind Jake. "I think they're trying to talk to us." Jake studied the group carefully. There were at least 40 Vrakoth in the clearing, representatives from multiple packs. Their body language showed no aggression, only purpose. They wanted something from the humans. They want to help us, Jake realized. They want to fight alongside us. The scarred leader seemed to understand that Jake was beginning to comprehend. It gestured again toward the north, then toward itself and its warriors, and back to Jake. The meaning was clear. Together, united against a common enemy. Jake thought about everything he had learned about Vrakoth culture. They respected strength and courage. They valued honor above life. And they had been used as weapons by the Zephyrians for years, forced to fight battles that were not their own. He made a decision that would change the course of the war. Jake stepped forward and placed his hand over his heart. Then he pointed. To the leader, to all the assembled Vraketh, and back to himself. He was accepting their offer of alliance. The effect was immediate. Every Vrakoth in the clearing repeated the gesture. Then they began to make sounds that could only be described as celebration. Not wild howling, but organized voices raised together in something like a battle song. Sir Hay said urgently, "This is way beyond our mission parameters. We should report this to command." "Report what?" Jake asked. "We've made contact with intelligent alien life that wants to help us win the war? That we've found a way to turn the enemy's greatest weapons against them?" Command will never believe it. If to prove his point, Jake's radio crackled with static. After hours of silence, a transmission was finally coming through from the human fleet in orbit. "Ground team, this is Colonel Martinez. Do you copy?" Jake activated his radio. "This is Morrison. I copy, Colonel." "Morrison, thank God. What's your status?" "We lost contact with your entire team during insertion." Jake looked at the 40 Vrakoth warriors surrounding him. How could he explain what had happened? How could he make his commanders understand that everything they thought they knew about this war was wrong? "Colonel, we encountered unexpected circumstances. Mission parameters have changed." "Explain." Jake chose his words carefully. "Enemy bioweapons are not what we thought. They're intelligent beings, not mindless creatures. And they're not loyal to the Zephyrians. They've been forced to fight against their will." There was a long silence. Then Colonel Martinez's voice came, back, tight with concern. "Morrison, have you suffered head trauma? Your report makes no sense." "Colonel, I'm sending you recorded footage from my helmet camera. Review it and you'll understand. The Vrakoth are not our enemies. They're potential allies. That's impossible. Those creatures have killed thousands of our people. Because they were ordered to, but they don't want to fight us. They want to fight with us." Another long silence. Jake could imagine the chaos his words were causing in the Fleet Command Center. 3 years of military doctrine were being challenged by a single soldier's field report. "Morrison, you are ordered to proceed to the extraction point immediately. Do not engage with any alien life forms. Consider them all hostile." Jake looked at the scarred Vrakoth leader who was watching him intently. The creature might not understand human speech, but it could sense the tension in Jake's voice. "Negative, Colonel. I'm proceeding with the original mission. The command center will be destroyed, but not the way we planned." "Morrison, that's a direct order. Return to extraction immediately." Jake turned off his radio. He had made his choice. The mission came first. But the mission had evolved beyond anything his commanders could understand from orbit. He turned to the assembled Vrakoth and pointed toward the north. The scarred leader understood immediately. It raised its head and made a long, complex call that echoed through the forest. The call was answered from multiple directions. More Vrakoth were coming. Sir Hayes said nervously, "We're committing mutiny. Court-martial, prison, maybe execution." Jake shouldered his pack and checked his weapons. "Rick, we're about to end a war. The details can be sorted out later." As they prepared to move north toward the command center, Jake's radio crackled again. This time, it was not Colonel Martinez. "All human forces. This is Admiral Peterson. We have detected massive alien movement on the planet's surface. Prepare for orbital bombardment in 6 hours. All personnel move to safe zones immediately." Blood went cold. The fleet was planning to destroy the entire region to eliminate the Vrakoth threat. They had no idea that Jake was leading those same Vrakoth toward the enemy command center. He had 6 hours to complete his mission and prove that the Vrakoth were allies, not enemies. 6 hours to end the war before his own fleet destroyed everyone. On the planet's surface, the scarred leader approached Jake and made questioning sounds. It could sense the urgency in the human's behavior. Jake pointed to the sky, then made a gesture indicating destruction falling from above. The leader's eyes widened with understanding. Time was running out. The creature raised its head and made the loudest call Jake had ever heard. It was answered by voices from across the forest. Within minutes, Vrakoth warriors were emerging from the crystal trees, converging on their location. Not dozens, but hundreds. Jake Morrison had become something unprecedented in military history. A human commander leading an army of alien warriors against their former masters. But he had only 6 hours to prove that understanding could triumph over hatred and that the greatest victories sometimes came from making enemies into friends. The Zephyrian command center rose from the alien landscape like a metal mountain. Energy barriers shimmered around its base, and weapon turrets tracked movement across the surrounding plains. Commander HFY stood at the main observation window. Watching the most impossible sight of his long military career, hundreds of Raketh warriors were moving across the open ground toward his fortress. But they were not attacking in their usual chaotic hunting formation. They moved like a real army, organized and disciplined. At their head walked a single human soldier. How many? HFY asked his tactical officer. Over 600, sir. All combat-ready adults. They're arranged in military formations we've never seen from Vrakoth before. HFY gripped the window frame. Activate all external defenses. Kill the human, and the creatures will return to their normal behavior. Sir, the Vrakoth are still carrying their control implants. Could simply activate the pain response and force them to obey. HFY considered this. Each Vrakoth had a small device implanted at the base of its skull. The devices allowed Zephyrian commanders to cause intense pain, forcing obedience. It was how they had controlled these creatures for years. Do it, he ordered. Maximum pain setting. Show them the price of disobedience, the tactical officer pressed a series of buttons on his control panel. Pain signal transmitted, sir. They watched the screen, expecting to see the Vrakoth army collapse in agony. Instead, nothing happened. The creatures continued their steady advance toward the command center. Sir, the implants are not responding. It appears they have been removed. HFY stared at the screen. Removed. How's that possible? Unknown, sir. But thermal scans confirm that none of the approaching Vrakoth are carrying control devices. 2 miles from the command center, Jake Morrison crouched behind a crystal rock formation with the scarred Vrakoth leader beside him. Through his scope, he could see the fortress ahead. Its defenses were formidable, but not impossible to breach. The Vrakothia leader made soft sounds and gestured toward the fortress. Jake had been learning their communication system during the march. The gestures meant strong walls and many weapons. Jake nodded and pointed to different sections of the defensive perimeter. He used hand signals to indicate weak points where the energy barriers flickered. The Vrakoth leader watched carefully, its intelligent eyes understanding Jake's tactical analysis. Behind them, hundreds of Vrakoth warriors waited in organized groups. Jake had divided them into units based on their natural pack structures, but taught them to coordinate with other units. It was a revolutionary approach that combined human military tactics with Vrakoth instincts. Hayes crawled up beside Jake. Sir, you need to see this. He handed Jake a small device he had found near the stream where they first encountered the wounded Vracode. Jake examined the device. It was clearly Zephyrian technology, but it had been torn from something. Dark stains covered its metal surface. It's a control implant, Hayes said quietly. The Vrakoth have been removing them from their own skulls. That's why the wounded one was bleeding so badly. It had just cut out its own control device. Jake looked back at the army of Vrakoth warriors. Each one had chosen freedom over slavery. Even though removing the implants caused terrible pain and could be fatal if done wrong, these creatures had literally torn the chains from their own minds. They freed themselves, Jake realized. All of them.
That's why they're following us.
We're not leading a rebellion. We're leading free beings who choose to fight. Scarred leader made an urgent sound and pointed toward the fortress. New activity was visible on the walls. Zephyrian soldiers were taking positions on the weapon platforms. They were preparing for battle. Jake activated his radio one more time, hoping to reach his fleet. Static filled the channel, but finally, Colonel Martinez's voice came through. Morrison, report your position immediately. We're beginning orbital. Bombardment in 3 hours. Colonel, you have to delay the bombardment. I'm leading a Vrakoth army against the enemy command center. They're on our side now. Morrison, you're clearly suffering from combat stress. Those creatures are incapable of changing sides. Turn to extraction now, or we'll consider you killed in action. Jake looked at the hundreds of alien warriors who had chosen to follow him. Colonel, In 2 hours, you're going to see something that will change everything we know about this war. These creatures are not weapons. They're people. They're fighting for freedom." He turned off the radio before Martinez could respond. There was nothing more to say. In the next few hours, he would either prove that enemies could become allies, or die trying. The scarred Verkith leader approached and made the chest-touching gesture of respect. Then it pointed to itself, to its warriors, and to Jake. It was asking for orders. Jake stood and raised his rifle above his head. The gesture was understood immediately. Every Vrakoth warrior in sight repeated the movement with their claws raised, toward the sky. It was a battle salute that combined human and alien traditions. Then Jake pointed toward the fortress and began walking. The army followed. Inside the command center, alarms blared as the approaching force came within weapons range. HFY watched his defensive systems activate. Energy beams lanced out toward the advancing army, but the Verkoth moved with impossible coordination. They scattered and regrouped like a single organism, avoiding the deadly fire. "Sir, his tactical," officer reported. "They're using advanced evasion patterns. These are not standard Verkath tactics. The human is teaching them," HFY realized. "He's turning our own weapons against us." The first wave of Vrakoth reached the outer energy barrier. Instead of trying to break through with brute force, they used their claws to precisely target the barrier generators. Jake had shown them where the weak points were, and they struck with surgical accuracy. Sections of the barrier flickered and died. More Verkath poured through the gaps, spreading across the fortress perimeter faster than the defensive weapons could track them. "Sir, outer defenses are failing. Creatures are inside our perimeter." HFY grabbed his personal weapon.
Oh.
"Soldiers to defensive positions. Kill the human at all costs. Without their leader, the creatures will become confused and easy to eliminate." But Jake was not easy to find. He moved through the fortress like a ghost, using passages that the Vrakoth showed him. The creatures knew this facility better than its builders. They had been forced to patrol every corridor, inspect every room, and they used that knowledge to help their human ally penetrate deeper into the complex. Jake reached the main power station without firing a shot. Vrakoth warriors had cleared the path ahead of him, eliminating guards with silent efficiency.
Great.
These creatures were not mindless beasts. They were intelligent predators who had chosen their targets carefully. The power station controlled everything. In the fortress, weapons, barriers, communications, life support. Jake placed his explosive charges on the key systems while Verkoth guards watched the entrances. But as he worked, alarms sounded throughout the facility. It's not a battle alarm, but something different. An evacuation signal. Jake's radio crackled with an automated message from the human fleet. "Orbital bombardment commencing in 30 minutes. All personnel clear the target zone immediately." His own fleet was about to destroy the command center with him and hundreds of Verkotha allies still inside. Jake had eliminated the facilities, defenses, and communications. But he had also trapped himself and his army in the target zone. The scarred Vrakoth leader appeared at his side, making urgent sounds. It could sense the danger even without understanding the human words. Jake made quick hand signals indicating sky. Fire and destruction. The leader's eyes widened with understanding. It raised its head and made a long, complex call that echoed. Through the facility, the response was immediate. From every part of the fortress, Vrakoth voices answered the call. Not panic, but organization. The creatures were coordinating an immediate evacuation. But as they prepared to leave, Jake realized something important. The planetary defense grid was still active. Even if they escaped the fortress, the Zephyrian weapons could still stop the human fleet from landing. The mission was not complete. Jake ran toward the main control center, followed by a group of Vrakoth warriors. At 25 minutes before the orbital bombardment began. 25 minutes to finish what they had started and prove that the impossible alliance could work. The control center was heavily guarded, but the Vrakoth knew every guard position and patrol route. They moved through the facility like water, flowing around obstacles and striking where the enemy was weakest. When Jake reached the main control room, Commander HFY was waiting for him. The Zephyrian commander stood alone among his deactivated control panels, his weapon drawn but not raised. "So," HFY said in perfect English, "you are the human who has turned my weapons against me." Jake kept his rifle ready but did not aim. It hit the alien commander. "Your weapons were never really yours. You just borrowed them. Now they've chosen a different path." HFY looked around at the Vrakoth warriors filling his control room. 3 years of perfect obedience, destroyed by one human who showed them kindness. "How is that possible?" "Because they were never your slaves," Jake replied. "They were prisoners waiting for someone to help them find the key." The first human dropships landed on the alien planet 3 hours after Jake Morrison shut down the planetary defense grid. Admiral Peterson himself was on the lead ship, along with Colonel Martinez and a full diplomatic team Akay had come expecting, to secure a defeated enemy stronghold. Instead, they found something that challenged everything they thought they knew about war. Jake stood in the main courtyard of the captured command center, surrounded by hundreds of Vrakoth warriors. The creatures had arranged themselves in perfect military formation, but their weapons were lowered in a gesture of peace. At their head stood the scarred leader, who had become Jake's closest ally among the aliens. Admiral Peterson stepped off his dropship and surveyed the scene with amazement. His security team raised their weapons instinctively when they saw the Vrakoth, but Jake quickly moved between them. "Stand down," Jake ordered. "These warriors are under my protection." Peterson was a career military officer who had fought aliens for 3 years. Seeing hundreds of them standing peacefully around one of his soldiers was almost too much to process. Morrison explained the situation immediately. Jake gestured to the Vrakoth formation behind him. "Admiral, meet our new allies. These warriors have freed themselves from Zephyrian control and helped us capture this facility. Without their assistance, the mission would have been impossible." "Allies." Peterson's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Those creatures have killed thousands of our people." "Because they were forced to," Jake replied calmly. "They had control implants that caused pain if they disobeyed. They removed the devices themselves, even though it was dangerous and painful. They chose freedom over slavery." Colonel Martinez stepped forward, her expression troubled. "Jake, this is difficult to believe. How do we know they won't attack us the moment we lower our guard?" The scarred Vrakoth leader seemed to understand the tension. It approached slowly and stopped 10 feet from Admiral Peterson. Then it performed the chest-touching gesture of respect that Jake had taught the humans to recognize. Peterson stared at the massive creature. "What is it doing?" "Showing respect," Jake explained. "It's a greeting between warriors. In their culture, it means recognition of strength and honor." The Admiral looked uncertain. His entire military career had been built on the principle that these creatures were mindless killing machines. Now one of them was offering what appeared to be a formal greeting. Hayes stepped up beside Jake. "Sir, I've witnessed everything, Commander. Morrison has described these beings are intelligent and capable of choice. They chose to help us instead of fighting us." Dr. Sarah Williams, the fleet's xenobiologist, had been recording everything with her equipment. She approached the group cautiously. "Admiral, if I may, the behavioral patterns I'm observing are consistent with advanced social intelligence. These creatures are not acting on instinct. They're making conscious decisions." Peterson was quiet for a long moment, studying the formation of alien warriors. Finally, he made a decision that would change the course of history. He stepped forward and placed his hand over his heart, copying the Vrakoth gesture of respect. The effect was immediate. Every Vrakoth in the courtyard repeated the gesture. Then they began to make sounds that were clearly celebratory. Not wild howling, but organized voices raised in what could only be called a song of victory. "My God," Peterson whispered. "They're celebrating peace." Jake smiled. "They've been at war for as long as we have, Admiral. They want peace as much as we do." Over the following hours, more human ships landed. Medical teams treated wounded Vrakoth warriors with the same care they gave human soldiers. Engineering teams worked alongside alien technicians to understand the captured Zephyrian technology. Most importantly, Dr. Williams began the complex process of establishing real communication with the Vrakoth leaders. The breakthrough came when the scarred leader drew patterns in the dirt. The patterns showed the history of Vrakoth enslavement. From their capture as young creatures to their forced participation in the war, Jake realized that these beings had never wanted to fight humans. They had been prisoners of war themselves. Admiral Jake said as they reviewed Dr. Williams' preliminary findings, "We need to rethink everything about this conflict. The Zephyrians didn't just attack our colonies, they enslaved an entire species and forced them to do the fighting." Peterson nodded slowly, which means our real enemy has been hiding behind these creatures for 3 years. "How many Zephyrian soldiers have we actually faced?" "Very few," Hayes answered. "The Vericath did most of the fighting. The Zephyrians stayed safe behind their command centers and used pain implants to control their slaves." Dr. Williams approached with new information. "Admiral, I've made progress with their communication system. It's more complex than we initially thought. They have concepts for honor, freedom, family, and justice. They're not just intelligent, they're civilized." The real test came 2 days later when a Zephyrian surrender delegation arrived under a flag of truce. Commander HFY, now a prisoner in his own former command center, has contacted his superiors and negotiated a ceasefire. The Zephyrian High Command wanted to discuss terms. Jake stood with Admiral Peterson and the Vrakoth leaders as the enemy. Delegation landed. Zephyrian ambassadors were tall, thin beings with pale skin and large eyes. They moved with the confidence of a species that had never expected to lose this war. The lead ambassador, a being called Diplomat Vexstar, approached the human group. He ignored the Vrakoth completely as if they were not worth noticing. "Admiral," Peterson Vexstar said in perfect English, "the Zephyrian High Command is prepared to discuss terms for ending this conflict. We are willing to consider territorial concessions in exchange for a return to pre-war boundaries." Peterson looked at the alien diplomat with cold eyes. "Before we discuss anything, you need to understand something. This war is ending, but not the way you expected. Your bioweapons have joined us. They're free beings now, and they're our allies." Star glanced at the Vrakoth formation and made a dismissive gesture. "Those creatures are property of the Zephyrian state. We demand their immediate return." The scarred Vrakoth leader stepped forward and made a sound deep in its throat. Not a growl, but something that carried the weight of absolute authority. Other Vrakoth joined in, creating a chorus that made the ground vibrate. Dr. Williams translated. "They're saying never again. They will never be slaves." Vexstar's confident expression faltered. "You cannot negotiate with property. These creatures belong to us." Dort. Jake moved between the diplomat and the Vrakoth warriors. Themselves, they chose to fight alongside us. They're not property, they're people, and they're under human protection now. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. 3 species sat at the same table, working out not just an end to the war, but the foundation for a new kind of peace. The Vrakoth would be granted their own territory on worlds they had helped liberate. The Zephyrians would pay reparations for their use of slave soldiers. Humans would guarantee the protection of Vrakoth rights and freedom. It took weeks to work out all the details, but finally the Kepler Accords were signed. The document established not just peace between humans and Zephyrians, but recognition of Vrakoth independence and the right of all species to self-determination. Jake Morrison attended the signing ceremony in his dress uniform, standing beside his Vrakoth allies. Scarred leader, now revealed to have a name that roughly translated to Honored Stormwalker, or a specially designed harness that displayed both human and Vrakoth symbols of rank. Admiral Peterson addressed the gathering of humans, Zephyrians, and Vrakoth. This peace was not won through superior firepower or tactical brilliance alone. It was won by one man who had the courage to see enemies as potential friends, and the wisdom to treat intelligent beings with the respect they deserved. Jake stepped forward to address the assembly. "I didn't win this war. We won it together. Human determination, Vrakoth honor, and the simple understanding that freedom is worth fighting for. This peace will last because it's built on respect, not conquest." In the months that followed, Jake Morrison became the first human ambassador to the Vrakoth Alliance. He helped establish exchange programs between human and Vrakoth military academies. He worked with scientists from both species to develop new technologies for exploration and defense. But perhaps most importantly, he proved that war was not always inevitable between different species. Sometimes the greatest victory came not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them discover that they had never been your enemies at all. Years later, when historians studied the end of the Zephyrian War, they would call it the miracle of Kepler 442b. One human soldier had walked onto an alien battlefield alone and emerged with an army of friends. He had shown that courage, compassion, respect could triumph over hatred and fear. The galaxy was a larger, more complicated place than anyone had imagined. But it was also a place where understanding was possible, where enemies could become allies, and where a single person's choice to see dignity in others could change the course of history. Jake Morrison had gone to war as a Navy SEAL. He returned as something much more important, a bridge between worlds. It's in proof that the best victories were the ones where everybody won.